Reflection, Chapter 3. They might have won the impassable battle against Shan Yu and the Huns, but it was a grim march to the imperial city. Not one of the soldiers laughed or sang or smiled. Even Chief Fu didn't wear his usual smirk. A stranger passing by could have mistaken them for a funeral procession. Mulan trailed the others. Shang slumped over Khan's neck in front of her. She kept her hand on Shang's shoulder, steadying him as Khan clopped along the icy path. The Tongshao Pass, where they defeated the Huns, was hours behind them now, but there was no end to the snow. Worse yet, even as I plodded down the mountain, it seemed to only get colder, not warmer. Worry festered in Mulan. Shang was getting worse. More and more frequently, she and Khan stopped to let the captain rest. Yao and Ling and Qianpo tried to hang back to keep her company, but with Chifu watching, she told them to go ahead with the others. Over the day, she fell far behind the rest of the soldiers, but Shang needed the rest. What began to trouble Mulan was his temperature. Every few hours, his skin glowed with fever. There she was, teeth chattering and skin rippling with goosebumps, practically freezing, while Shang was burning up from the inside. But she couldn't risk taking off his blankets and exposing him to the cold. Seeing him struggle against the heat, hearing him grunt with pain and mumble deliriously, they were punches to her heart. Only once before has she felt so hopeless, when Baba had been called to war. Desperation to save him had swelled in her chest, just as it did now. Desperation, then determination. But with her father, the way to save him had been clear. She'd gone to war in his place. With Shang, what could she do other than ease his suffering? I'll think of something, she thought, as she kicked at the snow. She trudged onward. Shang's mumbling faded, and worriedly, Mulan searched for his pulse. "How's he doing?" Mushu asked, head hanging low. Seeing how heartsick Mulan had been the past day, the dragon looked sorry for the comments he'd made earlier about her surviving instead of Shang. "Not great," Mulan said quietly. She brushed her hand across Shang's forehead. As the captain slept, the sweat on his skin dried into flakes of ice. "But his fever's down a little." "That's fantastic news," Mushu explained. He added, "He looks way better, more color in his cheeks." To demonstrate his point, the dragon pinched Shang's skin. The captain did not look better. His face stayed deathly pale. His lips were blue from the cold, and his air was thick with frost. He mumbled in his sleep. "See?" said Mushu. "Even he agrees." Mulan gritted her teeth. She didn't add that Shang's wound hasn't ceased to bleed. It slowed, but every time she checked the bandages, the blood was still warm, still fresh. There was nothing she could do to stop it. Trying to hide her despair, she urged Khan to walk faster. Her Cricky, hopped on her shoulder and chirped. It sounded consoling, but Mulan sighed and kept walking. The sun hung low in the west horizon. It was almost nightfall. The sooner they caught up with the others, the better. She couldn't stop replaying that moment she'd shot the cannon. She should have drawn her sword and been prepared to counter Shan Yu right after she fired. But what had she done? She'd watched, grinning like an idiot, because her plan had worked. Shang had paid the price for her mistake. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Mulan berated herself. If she'd been a better soldier, they'd be marching to see the Emperor while shouting out all their victory. Instead, she'd gotten their captain gravely injured. Shang let out another ragged breath, and his features contorted with agony. Mulan touched his forearm. "I'm here," she said, even though she knew her words wouldn't help him with the pain. She couldn't bear seeing him suffer like this. "I'll never forgive myself if he dies," she thought miserably. "If there are any gods listening, please spare Captain Li's life. He's a good man. He doesn't deserve to die." Of course, she got no reply. She hadn't expected to. Mulan blinked away her tears and wiped her nose on her sleeve. Crying over Shang wasn't going to help him. Getting him to warmth and safety into the imperial city, that would. The troops weren't as far behind as she'd feared. If she squinted down the path, she could make out Qianpo's burly figure marching down the hill. The end of the mountain path was near. She could see a forest not too far away. Past the forest, they'd meet the Yellow River, and they'd follow its course north toward the imperial city. Even from where she stood, she could make out the Emperor's glittering palace. So near, yet so far. At best, it was a 2 days' journey. But for Shang, each hour was a battle to live. She could hear the pain in his breath. She could see it whenever his chest rose and fell. Chifu was right, she said wretchedly. This is all my fault. Don't listen to that catfish, Mushu said. Chin up. You're strong, and you're smart. Heck, you defeated an army of Huns. You'll get the captain through this. I hope so. Keep talking to him, Mushu suggested. Make your voice soothing, like a cup of tea. Mulan rolled her eyes, but she desperately wanted to believe the dragon's words. You can make it, Shang, she said to the captain. She touched his arm, then clasped his hand, warming his cold fingers with her own. Whatever battle you're fighting in there, I'm going to help you. That's it, Mushu encouraged. Keep going. Maybe you should give him a little kiss. Mushu? The dragon shrugged. Hey, it works on all those folk tales. That's enough, she said, turning away to Mushu, so Mushu wouldn't see the blush creeping across her cheeks. Of all the crazy ideas. Let him sleep. For a moment, Mulan was glad Shang was unconscious, and probably hadn't heard the dragon's suggestion to kiss him. She squeezed his hand again. Sleep, Shang. We'll catch up with the others soon. They shouldn't be more than an hour from the bottom of the hill. She tugged on Khan's reins with her free hand, but the horse wouldn't budge. Khan whinnied. Then, Shang's hand grew warmer, and his breath steadier. Mulan jolted, relief swelling in her heart. Shang? Is it morning already? He rasped, coughing. You're awake. Mulan instantly dropped his hand, remembering that he was her commanding officer. She fumbled for her canteen. Here, have some water. Shang tried to sit up. Easy, she said. You're on my horse. Shang winced, then laid his head back down on Khan's neck and let out a groan. Where are we? Half a day from the Tungshao Pass, maybe less. Where are the others? Trust Shang to get straight to business, even when he was critically wounded. Up ahead, not far. She paused, already dreading the answer before she asked, Is the pain better? A shadow passed over Shang's face. Suddenly he looked vacant and lost. Is my father here? I heard him speaking earlier. To Chifu. Tell him I'm almost finished with my training. Your father? But Shang, your father is... Mulan stopped. Shang knew his father was dead. Qianpo had found the general's helmet in a battlefield strewn with the slaughtered soldiers of General Li's army. Shang had taken his father's helmet and hung it on his sword among the fallen in the snow. They'd all respectively watched him do it. Shang? Mulan put her palm against the captain's cheek. His skin burned with fever, much harder than before. Shang, wake up. Mushu crept to Shang's side and waved a claw in front of the captain's face. I don't want my father to see me like this, Shang mumbled. He blinked drowsily. Is that snake on my stomach? Who are you calling a snake? Mushu offended. Mulan snatched Mushu away. Leave him alone, she whispered through gritted teeth. You might want to take a look at him, said Mushu. His eyes are looking glassy and his skin's red. He's not looking too hot. Well, if you want to be totally accurate, he is looking hot. Yes, I know, Mulan interrupted, a note of panic in her voice. She slid off her horse and dragged Shang off Khan's back, lowering him onto the snow with a grunt. She peeled off the blankets Qianpo had wrapped over his body, then gently lifted his head and carefully dribbled the water from her canteen through his parted lips. Shang, she said, tapping his cheek with her fingers. Shang, it's Ping. I'm here. Wake up. Talk to me. Shang's head bobbled to the side. Ping? Yes, Mulan said. I'm here. You know, he murmured, I was so frustrated with you at first. Mulan tilted her head. You were the worst soldier I've ever seen, Ping. Do you remember? Always last in my exercise. You couldn't run. You couldn't shoot. You couldn't fight. I was so certain that you were completely unsuitable for war. I sent you home. Shang let out a dry chuckle, and for a moment his eyes opened. And yet, you surprised me.